It's 2004, and you are about to step into Blackwing Lair. You have all your consumables, and you have been grinding gold and honor all week for this game that you love. Fast forward to 2020, where it's raid night for Blackwing Lair. In order to keep your world buffs, you've shown just how much you love this game still by staying logged off for 5 days straight. Wait, what the heck happened here? Hello and welcome, I am Zabraxley. Allow me to open this discussion on world buffs by saying two things. One, I love the idea of world buffs. Two, world buffs. Today we're going to briefly go over world buffs, how they suck, and how they have the potential to be something pretty cool. Now be forewarned, there's going to be some hashtag changes in this video, so if that bothers you, I'm sorry. Without further ado, let's go. The phrase world buffs is pretty broad, but let's lock down a definition for the sake of this video. World buffs will refer to any buff that is not the result of player-created consumables or player abilities. This is a pretty broad but specific enough definition to encapsulate what most people think of as world buffs. So let's take a look at the complaints of how these buffs are handled in classic WoW. It seems like the negativity kind of comes down to three large complaints, being one, that they are usable in raids, two, that they are incredibly powerful, and three, player behavior. We're going to go a little bit out of order today so we can make this a little more fun. Number 3, player behavior is an incredibly difficult task to overcome. Despite how little world buffs are needed, the natural instinct of competition spikes up in people regularly in WoW. Couple that instinct with the fact that people have now created leaderboards, and now everybody who cares about even the tiniest bit of performance will feel pressured to acquire world buffs before their raid. Raiding has always been a competitive event. Since day one of MMORPGs, people would wait to hear about those who achieved the world first on new bosses, or their server first of their bosses. Years later, and the Race to World First events are now paid professional productions. Whether or not you're a world first raider, it's hard not to succumb to a little bit of meta slavery. That impulse to optimize yourself at every turn can really ruin someone's play experience, but it could also be that special activity that really makes you shine on the logs. Something that Blizzard has never really understood is that you just cannot ignore natural human behavior. Striving for efficiency and optimization is in our DNA, in our lives, and in our society. Literally. Xander Nethercutt of Medium.com once stated, quote, "Barring some miracle of human coordination, our quest to optimize our lives will never slow, let alone stop. If anything, it will accelerate," end quote. It's not unsurprising that players today are more acutely aware of ways to optimize their gameplay. It just happens because we're constantly aware of it given all the aspects of our lives. As the video game legend Sid Meier famously once said, quote, "Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a video game. One of the responsibilities of a designer is to protect the player from themselves," end quote. So how do we solve this optimization problem then? It's easy actually. Just stop trying to design against it. Players are going to optimize the heck out of everything. What if, though, not every world buff is available each week? Let's make world buffs not affect raw throughput. Imagine being able to take a world buff and receive it via a consumable versus an auto-applied benefit. This would come in use later, and thus leave breathing room for optimizers' preparation time. Just some thought, but something to consider is that we're not designing against human behavior here, we're designing it in mind. Number 2 regarding the power of world buffs is actually really easy to solve if you have a big giant brain like myself. You see, I'm going to propose an idea that's so foolproof, that's so clean and so easy to implement, and yet no one has seemingly thought of it. I'm going to be propelled into the big leagues, those of Shigeru Miyamoto and John Carmack. The way you fix the power in world buffs is to nerf world buffs. Seriously, it really is that easy. Just nerf them. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be incredibly complex. Just nerf them. Take away some of the raw throughput potential. Make them utility stats or something. A single world buff should not double the potential of your character. It's absurd. Nerf them. Blizz, hire me. The final and arguably most vocal problem with world buffs is that they are usable in raids. This one, well, again, it's actually a pretty simple solution, but it does require a bit more finesse than number 2 of just nerfing them. But we can just make world buffs not usable in raids. I mean, that would solve the problem, but it's also a really clunky solution. Instead, let's create some restrictions, but the limitations need to have some gameplay connection. We don't want to break immersion. The Heart of a Car buff is granted the same way, let's say, the same cooldown, even the same stats, but the buff only applies while the player is in Stranglethorn Vale, or any instance within that zone. We could apply the same principle to the Dire Maul North Tribute Run, and more. By tying these buffs to their relative geographical location, it presents these massive world-based benefits as a font of power in the world. If you move too far from that well of power, you lose said power. Some buffs would work perfectly fine like this, already implemented. If we applied the War Chief's Blessing to all players in the Barrens and Durotar, nerfed the haste rating a little bit, or removed it entirely, honestly, then you'd have a solid buff that helps low-level players. This wouldn't negatively impact any high-level players, since they'll be doing the same activity that grant the buff anyway, but other players can now reap some benefits, and it makes that world feel more alive. So let's run with this a bit more. I mentioned world buffs being consumables earlier. What if when you complete Dire Maul North Tribute Run, you can either accept the buff as normal, or you can receive a consumable that grants the same buff, or even maybe a weaker one, but can be used anywhere in the world at any time. Perhaps tie a cooldown to these items, like 24 hours, in order to keep it valuable. This way, even if we keep some of the power from world buffs, players don't have to run a triathlon on Tuesday and then log out until Friday in order to keep their buffs active. Honestly, we can still nerf the potential of some of the buffs, because things like Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer shouldn't be an entire tier 2 character worth of power in itself. I think by allowing a limited supply of world buffs to be a stored consumable, it would still allow for the consumable and buff stacking, while not demanding super degenerate gameplay in order to make that happen. Tying many other, if not all, world buffs to their relative geographical locations, though, makes far more gameplay sense, and serves as a far more immersive solution. Whichever of these two options you prefer, or a combination of both, one way or another, throughput nerfs would need to come. If buffs still exist this powerfully in the game, then the entire endgame PvE system has to be designed with this in mind. Classic WoW just wasn't. Kevin Jordan, one of the original WoW designers, even admitted this on stream.
What was the main idea behind world buffs in Classic? So the original idea was there was no oversight for it. It was just a bunch of dudes making content that was cool. Like, oh, I'm going to put in this thing that you can repeat and get a cool buff for a while.
World buffs in World of Warcraft could be really cool. They just need a little bit of a nudge in the right direction. Thank you all so much for sitting through another one of my internet ramblings, so I appreciate that. I feel like I rave like a fanatic in my room alone while there's no one around and I talk into the void. That is the internet. I really like poking these kind of game design problems and trying to figure out ways to genuinely solve them and to work them out and to at least bring up some more discussion and hope that a professional developer will actually do something about it. So if you did enjoy this, please hit that like button down below. It helps a lot, more than you may know. And subscribe if you enjoyed the content, as there's plenty of more stuff on the channel already and way more coming. So have a blast. Thank you so much for watching. Happy gaming, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!